Good morning. My name is Kirsten Perry, and as the 2018 School Counselor of the Year, I'm proud to introduce our next panel, 3.5 decades later. 35 years ago, a Nation at Risk report was released and included the following condemnation. While we can take justifiable pride in what our schools and colleges have historically accomplished and contributed to the United States and the well-being of its people, the educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens the very future of our nation and a people. I was a child at risk. Throughout my youth, I made a number of poor decisions and often engaged in risky behavior that sometimes dangerous behavior. As a result, I almost didn't graduate high school, and I became pregnant at the age of 18. My son's father, who was gang affiliated, was in and out of prison throughout my son's life. Despite these challenges, with the support of my family, I was fortunate to earn my bachelor's and master's degrees. There are so many youth, like myself, thank you. Thank you. There are so many youth like myself that need support to make healthy decisions that lead to success. A lot has changed in the last 35 years, yet the pillars of a nation at risk still resonate with me as a school counselor. I see firsthand the need for setting high standards and for challenging students with curriculum worthy of their intelligence. We need to give students the time they need to learn and give our teachers, school counselors, administrators, and all who work on the front lines of education both support and respect. And we need the sort of political, district, and classroom leadership that empowers students to dream big dreams and then make them happen. In this complex world, our schools are expected to provide more. Our educators shoulder more and more responsibility, and our students face challenges that didn't exist a generation ago. To explore where we are 3.5 decades after A Nation at Risk, I'm proud to introduce a panel moderated by Education Week's Stephen Sawchuk, featuring Dr. Milt Goldberg, Executive Director of the National Commission on Education Excellence that authored the report, Ms. Peggy Brookins, CEO and President of the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards, Mrs. Patricia Levesque, CEO of Foundation for Excellence in Education, and Dr. Virginia Fox, Chairwoman of the House Committee on Workforce and Education. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Stephen Sawchuk. I'm Associate Editor at Education Week. I cover curriculum for the newspaper, and I covered teachers for about 8 years before that. Just a couple quick reminders before we get into our discussion. First is that audience can submit questions through the RISE app. And if you're joining us from the web, you can ask questions on Twitter using the hashtag RISE2018. The other thing I'll mention is that the entire copy of A Nation at Risk is on the Agenda website, and I encourage you to download it and read it. It is not all that long. It should only take you about 15 minutes to read, and I think it's really worth taking another look at it now, 35 years later. So we're going to go right into our questions, and the first one I have is for the gentleman sitting here to my left, Milt Goldberg, who is on the panel that crafted this report. Milt, when you take a look at this report now, which of the criticisms that you and your team of writers leveled at the school system are still accurate, and what do you think we've actually improved in 35 years?
Well, I think basically the basic conclusions we reached are still accurate. I believe we are still a nation at risk. We have made some major changes but they're not as considerable as I would have liked over the years. One of them is that we have improved course taking for American students. A lot of students are taking more academic classes than they used to take. Teaching standards have increased to some degree, but they need to be a lot better than they are. The teacher reward system has to be improved much more considerably than it is presently. And the general sense of education in our society as critical for the well-being of the way we live and the way we work has to be adopted by every citizen in this country. And that's the message we try to send to the American people. I think it's not as acceptable today as it needs to be.
Is there anything that you think you misdiagnosed or that no longer rings true?
You know, I don't think so. We heard from people like the folks in this audience all over the country. We traveled the length and breadth of communities. We heard from student groups. And those of you who read the report know that our membership included school board members, the National Teacher of the Year, university presidents. It was a very diverse group of people who cared about American education and came to the writing of that report with the understanding that things weren't nearly so bad. But then when they were finished, they reached general agreement that things need to be mightily improved. I think that's still the case.
All right, my next question is for Patricia. One of the subtexts of A Nation at Risk is this idea that education reforms should become a major political issue and that the public should hold policymakers and legislators accountable for making these changes and seeing improvements. In fact, the report says that education reform should be a unifying national preoccupation. To what extent has that come to pass in 35 years?
Well, I think it certainly has been. To quote a former Secretary of Education, education should be and is a national priority, but it's a state responsibility and it's a local function. And so what has been wonderful to see the last several decades is the emphasis of the work that's being done in states. And so we work with states across the country, and to see the innovations that are occurring in California with the move to more weighted student funding, changes to their funding formula, the advances that Illinois recently made in their funding formula and a tax credit scholarship program, you know, the work that Mississippi's doing in early literacy and Louisiana's doing in curriculum coherence, and just the steady progress that Florida has made with being a large state, being near the bottom on NAEP and having continued progress to being in the top 10 on many of the NAEP indicators. I mean, this is a result of Congress making sure that education was a priority, but states also doing the work on specifics for state policy and then local districts implementing. So I think it's been working.
Follow-up question for you. So in 1983, we did not have advocacy groups like yours in the mix. We did not have education C4s. We didn't have single-issue advocacy groups really focused on education. We have those things now. But education is still not what we would call really a marquee issue for example, a presidential race. Why is that?
Well, I think it's, you know, go back to my earlier remarks, it's a national priority, but it's really a state responsibility. And so the levers that can be moved to really change education exist at the state level. And so I do think it's a very appropriate thing for education to always be in one of the top issues that governors are tackling, because they can actually be held accountable for it. They can be, they actually have some control over the policies that get implemented to change the education system.
So the next few questions I'm going to ask are actually sort of a deeper look at some of the remedies that were proposed in the report. And one thing that really surprised me when I was going back and reading this earlier this week was that the report talks quite extensively about standards and curriculum, what students should know and be able to do. It goes so far as to spell out the number of math and science and foreign language classes that high school students should take. And yet as many of you know, this has proved to be an enormously difficult goal for policymakers to agree on. I mean, so just to rattle off some, we had the 1989 Charlottesville Summit that discussed standards. We had the National History Standards that kicked up so much controversy and then ultimately died in around 1994. We had Goals 2000. In 2010, we had the Common Core. Nearly every state that's adopted that has rewritten parts of it. So I think I'll address this question to Representative Fox. You were one of the people who was critical of the Common Core and some of these efforts to develop shared standards. So who, in your opinion, should bear the responsibility of deciding what students should know and do?
Well, I agree with Patricia that education policy, the federal government has a very limited role in it. In fact, if you read the Constitution, there's no mention at all of education. That is not outlined as a federal responsibility. So I very much agree that this should be done at the state and local level. I was a school board member for 12 years, and I was also a university administrator and a community college president. So I've had some experience at all three levels. When we came in, I have to make one other comment. When we came in, there was a sign out there that, quote by President Reagan, "We're entering a new era and education holds the key." Now that was, I assume, said in 1983 or in conjunction with this report. But I truly believe that education is the key to everything that we do in our culture in terms of progressing and doing things better. And so I agree that we must look at how this policy is set in terms of what it is we do, either at the state level, local level, or federal level, and that we come up with the best ways we can. And I do think a lot of progress has been made, but I think when too many people look to the federal government, we make a mistake. And I have people come into my office every day saying, here's a problem, solve it for us. Many, many more things need to be solved at the local and state level because, as Patricia said, states are very different. They have needs, very different needs. The composition of the people is very different. The more we can do at the state and local level, the better off we all will be in terms of solving the problems. I also think I have great admiration for teachers. I grew up in an era where we didn't have wonderful physical facilities. In fact, we had some pretty lousy physical facilities in many ways. But we had good teachers, and we had parents who backed up the teachers in what they did. And they had high standards in those days. It seems like we went through a period of time where our standards slipped, and we had to bring more attention to it. So I would say that we need to allow teachers to do more. And I agree with Kirsten saying we do expect a lot of the schools, and we need to think that through too. Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up for you. If it's a state and local role, how can we make sure that all students are taught to a basic level of rigor? How do we make sure that there is some equity in terms of the educational opportunities students get?
Well, I think there's a difference in opportunities and outcomes, okay? When I taught, I did not believe in a bell-shaped curve when I first started teaching. I did not believe in it. I said, no, every student in my class can make an A. But every student in my class did not make an A. I taught for 15 years at the university level. And the students all knew what the expectation was. Now, what we've done at the federal level through ESSA is to give the responsibility, again, to the states and to the localities. And we've asked them to set the standards and asked them to measure it. So the federal government does, in still some ways, say, we want you to meet those standards. But I think we mix up opportunities with results. And I think we have to be very clear that there's two different things. You have to make sure the students have the opportunities as much as possible. But here we get in again to where we ask the schools to do too much sometimes. Students come to school differently prepared. And we're asking the schools to take students who are differently prepared to the same place. And I think that's very difficult for schools to do, and that they should not be asked to do that.
Another topic that, on rereading the report was the one that seemed, that still seemed the most relevant to me was frankly the discussion of the teaching profession. So I was going back through this, and some of the criticism there were that teachers were not as academically capable as people in other professions, that the pay isn't competitive, things like tenure and promotion should be tied to an evaluation system. And these were all things that I wrote about for 8 years at the newspaper, even though that was 25, 35 years later. So I will ask Peggy, who chairs a teacher professionalism organization, why are these issues still with us today?
I think a lot of these issues are there because we needed to, in response, to the report was A Nation Prepared. And the recommendations from A Nation Prepared talked about the quality of teachers. And what was recommended was that there would be an organization that was formed, and that organization was formed in 1987, which was the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. In what we were charged with as an organization was to increase the rigor of standards for teachers and to certify teachers who met that rigor of standards, and to make sure that we use the expertise of those teachers to mentor other teachers to work toward those standards as well. And it's been 35 years. We certified our first group of teachers in 1994, and we have 118,000 teachers who are currently certified. We have about 20,000 teachers who are in the pipeline working on their certification currently, but that's still not enough. There, are over 3.1 million teachers in this country. To have access to that process is critical. We all know that the most important school factor in a student's achievement and what they do in schools is the teacher and how that teacher has been prepared. So the rigor of the standards of the National Board for me as a board certified teacher have ensured that. I spent 38 years in a classroom, and I wish all of those I could have been a board certified teacher, but board certification didn't exist at that time. We have states around the country who have recognized the importance of that. 25 states offer an incentive for being board certified. 10 of those states are offering even more of an incentive for teachers who are in high-need schools and remain in those high-need schools. And we talk about, I'll have to give props to Virginia Fox by saying, North Carolina leads. They've led from the very beginning. And the work that we're doing there with beginner to board certified, getting teachers very early in their career to understand what it means to meet high standards and what that looks like in practice within a classroom. So there's a lot of work going on around the country. There's a network now of 70 networks around the country of board certified teachers who are ensuring that their colleagues have the support that they need. But that's still not enough. We need more. We need more support. We need it at the school level. We need people who are on the ground in the classroom who understand the current needs of the community, what the students need, what parents want from a school, and then to make those decisions and have the right supports in place at the state level and policy to ensure that every child in this country deserves an accomplished teacher.
Under the Obama administration, there were, that was really the marquee issue for that administration in some ways in education was on teachers, especially evaluating teachers and the mentoring piece as well. But the teacher unions and a lot of teachers felt like some of those efforts actually harm the profession rather than helping it. Is that a fair criticism?
I don't know if that's a fair criticism or not, in the sense of, I'll take it back to my own training. And if it depends on your view and the lens that you're looking at this through. Are we looking at a growth mindset? Or are we looking at coming in and checking off to say, oh, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, or you didn't do that? That's the obvious. It's like,
Whether it's evaluative
or
improvement oriented.
Our focus is on the improvement piece of this. And it has to always be on the improvement piece. There is not a teacher out there who wakes up in the morning and says, I'm coming here to do a bad job today. They do not. The more successful you are, the better you feel, the happier the children are in that classroom and the community itself, because their children are able to fulfill their own dreams, hopes, and aspirations of being whatever they want to be. But we have to instill that in the community itself to say, there's some responsibility for all of us. And for the students, knowing what that responsibility is, for teachers knowing what it is, for administrators, and for the community, for policymakers knowing what it is, and focusing on what works and the growth mindset.
I wonder if I could pick that up, Stephen. The what works issue is a very crucial one in American education. I wonder if I could tell a very brief story. When I was a school principal many, many years ago, we had a school, an elementary school in a predominantly minority community that was doing terrific work. It got a lot of good reviews, and it resulted in a lot of principals coming to see what was going on in the school. And they looked at it, and they all left with essentially the same comment. It was, Milt, this is terrific what you're doing in your school. Let me tell you why I can't do it in my school. Mm-hmm. And I think the essence of that is something that Peggy just responded. Education is not an idiosyncratic thing. We can learn a lot from what's already going on. We need to do a much better job of the kind of thing that Peggy's describing, of learning from what others are doing and maximizing those benefits.
So the biggest story in education right now, I think unquestionably, is the teacher walkouts and the activism that we've seen in 4 states. It's focused almost entirely on pay. Let me put this question to all of you. Is this a turning point for teacher professionalism and particularly the way teachers are compensated?
I think it's a turning point, and it's not just about pay. It's about conditions, it's about the lack of support, it's about not having a voice, not being at the table, not being heard. You're closest to the work. You understand what your community needs, what students need, and somebody needs to listen to that piece of it. And pay is just an issue. So if I think about when I taught, I didn't work just one job. In order to survive, I worked in the summer. Whether I was working at school, I worked a summer job. I had to work a job after school, and this will tell you how old I am. When I first started teaching, my starting pay was $7,900. So it just tells you, and because of what happened in the recession to every state, those pay levels have not caught back up to where they should be. So teachers, I've had Uber drivers who are teachers. I talk to them all the time, and I'm like, what do you do? And when they tell me they're teachers, and I'm like, wow, do you have to supplement your income in this way? But it is still more than the pay that everyone is striving for.
I cannot remember exactly where this conversation or topic was held, but it was many years ago. And we talked about teaching as a profession. And yet, teachers, I have great sympathy for teachers. Teachers are in a classroom all day long and have a hard time finding time to go to a bathroom. There were never any phones in the classrooms. If we want teachers to be professions, we have to treat them as professionals. And we have not treated teachers as professionals in the past. Again, we've denied them little things that would make them feel like professionals. And I agree that almost all the teachers I've ever known go there with a real dedication to doing a good job and making a difference in their students' lives. Even though I only taught part-time, I felt the same way. Everybody I know goes into teaching feels that way. I've often advocated that we reverse the way we pay people in education. We pay college professors the highest pay. They have the cream of the crop. We should reverse. We should pay elementary and secondary teachers what we pay college professors, and pay the college professors what the elementary and secondary teachers make, because they've already done all the hard work. And we've got it backwards in our country.
We could solve the teacher shortage in one easy step.
I agree with that entirely. But that means the states that you described as having ultimate responsibility. The states have to take the bull by the horns and say, we've got to accomplish that. You can't leave that to the federal government.
No,
the states have to do
absolutely
it.
not.
So why haven't the states, I mean, why haven't they? 35 years we've been talking teacher pay, so.
Well, I will venture, and I'm probably just walking into something not very positive. I've always contended it's because the majority of elementary and secondary teachers are women, and the majority of college teachers are men. And this is, it is historical, and it is something that will be, we should have overcome it a long time ago, and we have not.
Stephen, one thing I would add to that is that, you know, and I've heard my current chair, my former boss, say this a lot, is that as a governor, you have to fund your priorities, right? And what a lot of states are facing is the aging of the baby boomers,
right.
And that really the tension between the healthcare budget needs and the education budget needs. And so when we work with governors or gubernatorial candidates, one of the things that we always say is you have to fund your priorities. Education is needs to be a priority. It's a state responsibility. But then there's a lot more after that. It's not just the amount of funding. It is how the education systems are funded. And I think what's promising is more states that are looking to fund their K-12 systems based on the needs of the student, you know, making sure low-income students generate more funding, making sure students with special needs generate more funding. That's a critical switch that still a lot of states haven't tackled. But then, you know, my only comment on teacher pay is, you know, I think one of the things that we should do more of is make sure teachers are funded based on the who, where, what, and how, right? Who they teach. Certain students with certain needs are more challenging, and teachers that take on teaching more students with special needs or others who are struggling and at risk should be paid more. Where they teach, teaching in a Title I school, teaching in a high-risk school, should be paid more for teaching in those schools. What you teach, right? We have just certain subject areas that the marketplace opportunities are much greater, and we have to pay those teachers that teach in high need, critical shortage areas more, and then how? Right? The teachers that have national board certification, the ones that can make more progress with students no matter what type of students placed in their classroom, they need to be paid more. And more of that is as a local issue of collective bargaining and how they negotiate those pay packages. So there really is a state responsibility to make sure education is adequately funded, and that there's performance built into the funding formula, but it's also locally how they bargain for the teacher pay. That's important.
I think that's a really good point, because the contract specifies so much of how those decisions are made.
Stephen, I would like to bring it up a little more to the present too. Every day people come into my office and say, I have jobs and I can't find anybody with skills to do those jobs. And what I'm saying to those people is, you need to go get involved in your education system. I think for many, many years, business and industry said, we're leaving education to the political people and to the educators. I believe right now we are in a different kind of situation. I won't call it a crisis. We have 6 million jobs in this country unfilled. 6 million jobs. And it's because in our educational programs throughout, from kindergarten through post-secondary, are not producing people who have the skills to fill those jobs. And what's happening is now business and industry is beginning to pay more attention to what is happening. In the past, it's been a small minority of people. Now they're beginning to look at what is happening in the schools, because I believe education at all levels is there. Obviously, it's there to make us well-rounded individuals, lead a successful life. But in our culture, the way you do that is through a successful occupation. And so people are beginning, though, to see now they have not paid attention to what's happening in the schools, and they're not finding the people with the skills they need, and they're beginning to look back to the schools and say, we need to begin doing this early on, not wait till people go into post-secondary education. And so I think you're going to see some changes occur as a result of more business people getting involved with what's happening in education.
I can say that at my newspaper, that is a thread of coverage that we've really increased because we are hearing more as well on that topic. And frankly, it was part of the report, although it's not the part that we tend to think about with A Nation at Risk. I have one more question, and then I think we're going to turn it over to audience and web questions. And that is, I'm going to ask this of Milt. The very best known line from A Nation at Risk is a rising tide of mediocrity. And so to put that in context, we had the National Assessment of Educational Progress results come out this week. And we know, I mean, you can sort of look at this two ways, right? If you compare to how the nation was doing back in 1983, we have made progress. Just empirically, scores are higher. We also know, though, that they have been flat, really, for the last 7-8 years. Is that still an accurate description today, Milt? Are we stuck again? Are we risk being in a new tide of mediocrity?
When I saw the scores in the newspaper, as you all did this week, I was reminded of the line, and I thought to myself, that rising tide of mediocrity is about to drown us. The fact of the matter is, it's just a shame for American youngsters to be doing so poorly when we've invested so much money at federal, state, and local levels to improve American education. And I think we've got to take a hard look at how to improve conditions in schools so that those scores go up, because they are rational explanations of a lack of achievement that makes it sure that what the representative has just described about the work situation in America, these youngsters are going to grow up not being eligible to take the variety of multi-skilled jobs that are developing more and more in this country. This is going to become more of a nation at risk unless we improve the education of our children.
One follow-up, and I'll address Patricia with it. The gaps are widening between high and low-performing students, and that was sort of the headline, really, of Monday's release. Not good news. So where do we go from here?
There clearly is the NAEP data was depressing. I think a lot of us were sad, although we have to acknowledge there was a major shift this year in how it was administered. But there were some bright spots, and Mississippi and Florida are two of those bright spots. And I think specifically for Florida, if you look at the trend line, that state has increased in their NAEP performance every single administration for 20 years, but for 2. And that type of progress for a large state that is majority minority, that is majority low income, that has more than 250,000 students that are English learners and 300 different languages being spoken, there's something that's going on, and the achievement gaps in that state have been narrowing. And so things that have been working that we know work are having high standards, having expectations, having rigorous school accountability where the schools know the things that we want you to do is help all children get to grade level, ensure they all make progress, ensure your lowest performing ones get extra help, And then there's other programs that are in place. There's a focus on early literacy. There are performance outcomes for students to graduate with college credit or an industry credential. I'm looking at Dr. Barbara Jenkins from Orange County Public Schools, who the increases in the number of students in Orange County, minority students who are graduating with industry credentials and college credit is incredible. And that state has also done massive amounts of public and private school choice. So there are a lot of things that can be done. There are states that have stuck with it for the long haul and are seeing results. And again, you know, what I think our desire is every state needs to move more and more towards how do you make your state focused on the student? How do you make your funding policy centered on students? How do you make your accountability and your assessment policy focused on students? And the more that states do that, they will see progress. It will take longer than you and I would like, but it can be done.
All right. I think we are going to go to questions, and I don't know where my question there she is.
My name is Nina Reese. I'm the president and CEO of the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. Great panel. My question is really about choice and the role of school choice in this debate. Since A Nation at Risk, school choice programs and charter school programs have grown quite a bit around the country, and we can now point to a number of places where charter schools and those communities that have a lot of options are knocking it out of the park. How do you promote these types of programs at a time when ESSA and the federal role has taken a back seat? And you know, to the extent we are allowing states and school districts making decisions, how do you continue to promote these programs in a way that boosts those excellent ones and perhaps punishes those that are not doing a good job?
And worth noting, I think, and Mild will correct me if I'm wrong, that school choice does not appear in A Nation at Risk.
No. However, the general sense, I believe, of the commission members at the time was the more that schools are willing to experiment with different kinds of organizations to improve student performance, that's all the better. They were not explicit about what kinds of organizations, but I think the growth of charters are a good example of those kinds of changes.
Sure, I'd love to answer that question because I think, again, the ultimate goal that we should all be striving towards with policy is how do you make the education system centered around the student, where everything is about what is best for each individual child. And the more that we know about brain science, the more we know when we poll parents about what they want in a school, what they think is important for their child, the more we realize that it would be unrealistic to have any single school somehow be the exact perfect fit for every single child. And so the more that we move to greater options, whether that's inter-district choice, intra-district choice, public school choice through charters, and private school options, the more that parents will be able to find the education setting that's the best fit for their child. And putting parents in the driver's seat of those decisions is just critical. When they have that opportunity to make decisions on where their child can go to school, they have power now in the education process. They have leverage to get for their child what they need. And they can change their mind as their child changes and needs a different type of environment. I think educational choice is one of those, it's a fundamental that we need to have. And I think what has been wonderful to see is the expansion of public charters in the country. You know, we went from having about 300,000 students about 20 years ago in charters to having 3 million. And for private school choice, you know, just 20 years ago, we had the first statewide school voucher program that had only 74 students in it, to now having almost 500,000 students in private school choice programs. Parents need to be in the driver's seat, and giving them more power in those decisions is critical, I think, to moving our country forward.
Can I add one thing to that? I think one of the things that got expressed very strongly by some of our commission members 35 years ago was that whatever you do to try to improve education, you've got to provide evidence after you've done what you've done to demonstrate that it's worked or it hasn't worked. And so whatever the changes that take place, whether it's under choice, or charters or the regular system. The evidence must be produced that demonstrates students have benefited.
And I also think, I'm going to speak for my own organization and the teaching profession at this moment, is that the quality of teacher that you put in front of every student, no matter where they are, matters.
I think we have time for one more.
Yes, we have a question here from the audience. We have been speaking a lot about the different issues surrounding, the state of schools. What do we say to those teachers on the grounds right now? What words of comfort do you have to encourage them to keep moving forward, to not leave the field? And what words can we tell them to continue their fight?
I think a lot of teachers want to see a trajectory of a career path, and a lot of them are not seeing that. The other thing they would like to see is shared leadership, to have a voice at the table, to have people listen to the fact that they're, in the trenches, they're doing the work, and they know what works for these particular students at this particular time in this particular situation. The other piece of that is understanding that your first day in the classroom should look very different than your last day in the classroom, and that you're provided opportunities along the way so that you're not in the same room that you started teaching in when the day that you retire. And those opportunities haven't always existed. I think the promise of ESSA is that we will have some of those opportunities of shared leadership. A lot of people don't want to go into administration. I love the classroom. And to be able to lead and still have a foot in the classroom is a desire that most teachers have.
I saw Representative Fox nodding her head, so maybe we'll give you the last word.
I just agree with what Patricia has said and what our National Board Certified head says. It is the more we can do to help teachers be treated like professionals, the more they will respond. Mm-hmm. And it fits in with my comments earlier about treating them like professionals, having teachers be able to collaborate with each other and learn from each other and be a part of the decision making. I think too often, again, in our schools, we have dictated, not just from the federal level, but from the state level, but from the county level to teachers what to do to meet somebody else's expectations that were formed without the input of teachers. And the more you can involve them, the better off we are. Now, the other thing I think is there will be, again, there's going to be a difference in the quality and the performance there. But I totally agree that we absolutely must reward. And I think Patricia's comments about the where, what, when, and how, and Peggy's comments about rewarding those who have the most challenging areas and do the most to work on improving. We just have to do that. We have to do differential pay, and we will get differential results.
All right, I think that's a great place to leave it. And I would like for everyone to give the panelists a round of applause.